Welcome to you all. It's Chart Chat. It's not chit chat. It is Chart Chat. And as always, we have four hosts, but you may see a fifth one on screen today. We will introduce our guest in a moment. Before we do that, let's go to our normal hosts. I'm Andy Cotgreave, technical evangelist at Tableau. It is great to be here in round 21. Amanda, say hello.
Hi there, I'm Amanda Makulec. I'm the Executive Director for the Data Visualization Society and the Data Viz Lead at Excella, based here in Washington, D.C.
Fantastic. Jeff?
Jeff Shaffer here, Chief Operating Officer in Cincinnati, Ohio in the U.S. and adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati, where I teach data visualization.
Amazing. And finally, last but not least, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Wexler. I'm the founder, principal, and sole employee of Data Revelations, along with Andy and Jeff, one of the three authors of the Big Book of Dashboards and author of the forthcoming The Big Picture, which I will be plugging shamelessly later. Thank you.
And constantly for the next 3 months, if I know anything about Steve's schedule. Thank you, everybody. Well, welcome along, but we have a fifth guest with us today, or a special guest today. For round 21, we are joined by Mr. Tim Harford. Actually, are you a Mr. or a Doctor?
I think I'm Tim Harford Esquire, actually, if you're going to be super formal about it.
Well, we're a formal bunch here in Chart Chat. Tim, welcome to the show. Do you want to give us a brief introduction?
Thanks so much, Andy. It's really great to be joining you. As a non-chart nerd, I'm kind of like a general nerd, and it's great to be sort of getting deep into the charts. I am the author of the books you can see on your screen in front of you. They're the same book, in fact, The Data Detective in North America, How to Make the World Add Up Everywhere Else, coming out in paperback in about 2 weeks. I'm a columnist for the Financial Times. I present the BBC Math Nerd radio show, More or Less, and a podcast called Cautionary Tales, which in fact features one of the charts we're going to be discussing later.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the show. I will just let everybody know there's an American and a British version. One of these editions spells the word color and visualization correctly, and the other one does not. Let's move on to what Chart Chat is and isn't. So when Steve, Jeff, and I were writing the Big Book of Dashboards, one of the most rewarding things was the intense debate and conversation we had about the visualizations we were putting in the book, the rights, the wrongs, the compromises. And we wanted to bring that debate to life through Chart Chat so that all of us on screen can contribute. But you watching are the other important parts of this series that we do, because we want to hear your opinions through chat. So do make sure you tell us what you're thinking throughout the show. We'll try and keep up to date and bring some of those comments to life. And then there's an opportunity to contribute, which I'll tell you in a moment. Today, we have an agenda. Steve is going to reflect on last month's Chart Chat. He had some thoughts. And then following that, Tim is going to do all the work this hour. He's going to talk us through Florence Nightingale's rose diagrams, the inequality map on the New York subway published by New Yorker, and finally, Detritus by Information is Beautiful. It isn't all going to be Tim, because we're going to chime in with our thoughts as well. If you have thoughts and opinions, as we say, do put these into chat. We want to know what you're thinking, but there is the after party. After about 50 minutes to an hour, the four of us will try and step back and open the mic and the chat boxes to all of you. So if you want to stick around, that's optional. You can stick around for that. Open your webcam and share your thoughts on what we've talked about. I think that sounds like a great episode. So let's start. So first of all, Steve, it's over to you. Feel free to share your screen. And what did you think about last month's Chart Chat?
Hey, give me 1 second here. So the main thing we discussed was healthcare worker vaccine hesitancy. And I kind of felt we missed a really good opportunity with this, and that kind of kept me up. It started innocently enough on our Slack channel. Amanda asked us, what did we think of this way to visualize this data? Vaccine intentions among frontline healthcare workers. Well, actually, the catalyst from this came from John Schwabish, who saw a headline and said, is this misleading? Is this a fair representation? And what headline was that? It was in the Washington Post, and it was a study conducted by the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation. And the headline was, more than 4 in 10 healthcare workers have not been vaccinated. If you look at the Kaiser Family Foundation report, they actually went a little bit further. Nearly half remain unvaccinated. Oh my God. If healthcare workers aren't taking the vaccine, why should I take the vaccine? Really pushing some hot buttons. By the way, if you look in the bottom left over here, I want you to see the publication date. Well, let's start with, the question was, is this a good way to show the data? It was a may not see survey data presented this way, where the responses are in separate columns. And I just want you to focus on the 4 possible answers. Total frontline healthcare workers, 52% have been vaccinated when they published this study, 19% plan to be vaccinated, 12% haven't decided, and 18% do not plan to get vaccinated. And is this a good way to show this? But of course, we went a little further than this. Is the data any good? And are the headlines misleading? All good questions. But then I think we kind of went south. Hey, let's each produce our own take on this and let attendees decide which one of our takes is best. And I'm sorry we went that route, but let me show you some highlights of the different approaches. Amanda questioned the various colors that were in play and decided to use orange bad, blue good, and realized, hey, shouldn't we in fact be grouping together receive the dose and schedule to receive? In fact, a lot of this data came from early February. By the time it was published, a lot of those people who were scheduled to receive the vaccine probably got the vaccine. So I think grouping that makes a great deal of sense. Then Amanda said, I want to focus on the people who are on the fence about this, because maybe if we can get the people who are undecided, we can move them and we can have a critical mass of people and reach herd immunity. So said, is this something we should explore? Andy also divided these things into columns and said, wait, I want to explore the people who don't plan to get the vaccine. And what, why is that? Is there something that we can do about that? And then said, I want to show a part to the whole ratio over distribution. And he came up with these multiple pie charts, which kind of made my head want to explode. We will come back to that in a minute. My take on it was, first, let me start with what was in the KFF report, but use colors that made sense to me. And we've been debating since day one, does blue universally mean good and orange universally mean bad? Yes, except in cases when they don't. And I started looking at this, these pockets of wow, large percentage of people saying that they're not going to get the vaccine. But if you follow the links that were in the Washington Post report, you can find all the background survey data and the findings and discover that there's huge margin of errors in these places. And so that saying 28% of Black healthcare workers don't plan to get it. In fact, it could be a lot less, or it could be a lot more, as what I'm having over here. So that's a big concern, and it's mentioned in the reporting, but not prominently. In any case, this was my take on things, a divergent stacked bar chart with putting all the undecideds in their own column, because I think we need to look where there are lots of undecided. And I kind of put this magical, hopeful reference line of 70%, saying, gee, if we can just get 70% of people to be vaccinated, maybe combined with people who have in fact gotten COVID, will reach herd immunity. I want to point out something else as well, these little red dots showing the pockets of places that are below 70%. I did not think of doing this. It was when I saw Jeff's data visualization, I went, oh, that's such a good technique. I got to borrow that. In any case, this was Jeff's take, and he's kind of, going kind of Nigel Holmes on us with this syringe image. Let's just focus on the top part of this. And he started by saying, hey, I'm going to do something I think is confrontational, which is, or not controversial, which is, we usually don't recommend doing a 100% stacked bar chart, but I think it makes sense in this case. But there's some really brilliant additions to this. One is he's trying to show, well, herd immunity, we don't know exactly when we're going to reach herd immunity. It's within a range. And he's showing the margin of error and the pockets of where problems are. And there's some really great stuff going on in here, but instead, head is exploding because Andy and I start getting into a raging debate as to, oh no, don't do pies. It should be a thermometer chart. When in fact, you don't want to even show what percentage of the whole is this. You want these slivers to be as small as possible. But that didn't stop from, hey, let's ask people on Twitter what they think. And then got all these conversations going on. This one's better. That one's better. No, you should have done this. No, you should have done that. And we had forgotten our own recommendation on this. When we present our workshops, this is a slide that we put in it. Find collaborators and iterate, iterate, iterate. We didn't do that. It would have been much better had we done it to show the different versions of it. But let's say one of us would take the lead on this. If this were the big book of dashboards, one of us would be, I'm responsible, this person is responsible for doing this. But Jeff might solicit feedback from the three of us. What do you think of this? Is it working? What would you do differently, et cetera? And then it's up to him to decide whether to accept it or reject it. But I think, Jeff has a really, brilliant thing going on with this. We could discuss whether the syringe is warranted or not. And then something better than what Jeff would have come up on his own, I think would have been produced from this. At least that's was our experience with the big book of dashboards and all dashboard development. Some of us may have had dissenting opinions. We might have said, well, I see Jeff did this, but I might have done this other thing. And I think that would have been a better way to tackle this. And by the way, my head is still exploding because I think those headlines were really bad. The reporting was actually pretty good, but those headlines of 5 out of 10, nearly half people haven't been vaccinated, I think is highly misleading. In any case, I wish we had gone that route, and I just wanted to try to kind of make amends for that this time around.
Thank you, Steve. I mean, I did the pie charts just to kind of make your head explode, right? Ravi Mystery described me as the devil's advocate on Chart Chat yesterday on Twitter, and I sometimes, he probably meant provocateur, but yes, iterate. Everybody iterate. That is true. If you're writing a book, you iterate. If you're building visualizations, iterate. All right. Thanks for your comments. People like the syringe. And we could have done a huge amount by iterating on that. So thank you, Steve. Tim, it is over to you. You are going to introduce some, took us through a classic in data visualization with maybe some extra nuance behind it. So without hesitation, repetition, or deviation, tell us about this visualization.
Yes, I feel slightly humbled to be humbled. I'm intimidated is the word. I'm intimidated because you guys are proper chart people and I'm not a proper chart person. So, but hopefully I'll be going off piste a bit and sharing some topics that, or some angles on old topics that you might not have seen before. I mean, obviously no one's seen this graph before. It's extremely obscure. No one in the world of data visualization has ever seen the Florence Nightingale rose. I jest. I realized that the very first episode of Chart Chat was about this very diagram. So let me offer a couple of opinions about this. The context is interesting. So as people will be vaguely aware, Florence Nightingale, director of nursing in hospitals in Istanbul, in Scutari in Istanbul. She's in charge of the nurses who are looking after British soldiers coming back from the Crimean War, which is a particularly pointless conflict. And the conditions in the Scutari hospitals, there are several hospitals, are appalling. Soldiers would be dying in their beds. They'd just be stitched up in their own blankets, carried out to a mass grave, and then the next guy would be deposited in the same bed. And they were being killed in large numbers by infectious diseases. This is well known, and this diagram is also well known. This is Nightingale's portrayal of the pattern of deaths. So on the right, a slightly unusual reading of this diagram. On the right, you see these wedges. The pinky red wedges are soldiers dying of wounds. The black wedges, and these are overlapping, as you can sense. The black wedges are soldiers dying of all other causes, so presumably things like accidents. And the pale blue-grey wedges are soldiers dying of what was called at the time zymotic diseases, so basically infectious diseases. At the time, people didn't have a germ theory, so it wasn't quite clear what was causing infectious diseases, and this was part of the point. So one thing to note about this graph is the color that Nightingale chose for those blue wedges. That is the color of the binding on the official reports and regulations of the British Army. So there's sort of this very kind of, there's a subtle burn going on at British Army red tape is causing these deaths. So what's interesting about this diagram? A couple of things. One is the context. So Nightingale comes back from the Crimean War. She has been very ill herself. She is then locked in combat with the British medical and military establishment, who do not think that anything seriously went wrong in the Crimean War. And Nightingale's argument is that poor standards of hygiene, not only in the war, but in peacetime barracks and in peacetime hospitals, these poor standards of hygiene are causing soldiers to die unnecessarily. And she has a great turn of phrase. She says, it's as though you'd taken 1,100 men out on Salisbury Plain and shot them. That's the effect of the poor hygiene. And she was very clear. She wrote to Sidney Herbert, her friend, who was a cabinet minister, and with a plan to use data visualization to achieve change. She said she was going to have these diagrams framed on the wall of the Horse Guards barracks and the medical establishment, the hospitals, the Surgeon General, the Chief Medical Officer of England. They're all going to have framed copies of these diagrams. She was going to send them to Queen Victoria, to the ambassadors of all the crowned heads of Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a public relations campaign. That's interesting, because that is most unusual for the 19th century, certainly in England. So Alison Headley, who's an expert in 19th century data visualization, points out that the French were doing a bit of this, but the British statisticians weren't doing data viz at all. And Nightingale, kind of from nowhere, comes up with this plan to use it as a rhetorical weapon. That's interesting. The second thing that I think is interesting is the kind of naughty way that she frames this diagram. So you've got on the right-hand side, the first year of the war, these huge deaths from infectious diseases going around July, August, September, all the way around. Nightingale arrives in November. It's an appalling winter. And then at March, you then leap over to the other side of the diagram, and that's the second half of the war. And then look, it's a two-part story, catastrophe and then redemption. Look at these deaths fall. They're so small you could even fit them in Andy's spotlight. So she's very much portraying this as a before and after. And what happened in between these two spirals is a sanitary commission turned up and did things like, cleared dead horses out of the water supply, just little things like that, which tended to reduce the death rate. But the reason I say it's a bit naughty is because it imposes a before and after structure, perhaps a bit too strongly. So if you were to plot this diagram in a more natural way, say as bar charts, the before and after story doesn't come across nearly as strongly. And there are other explanations of what you're seeing. For example, maybe it's just fewer soldiers showing up at the hospital, therefore the hospital's less crowded, therefore the death rate is less serious. Maybe, we've heard this over and over again with COVID, maybe it's seasonality. Maybe it's just winter that was killing everybody. But in presenting the diagram like this, Nightingale makes it pretty much impossible to draw any other conclusion. It was infectious disease. It was fixed by better sanitation. And that was the argument she was having with the medical establishment, who said that basically infectious disease was practically speaking unavoidable. They lost that fight. Nightingale won. She completely vanquished all of her opponents in a long haul. And this diagram was a huge part of that. And she was correct, but it raises ethical issues for chart designers. Like if you happen to be right, is it okay to put your thumb on the scale when you're designing your chart? Anyway, I've said enough. Except if anybody wants to hear Helena Bonham Carter playing Florence Nightingale, they should listen to my Cautionary Tales podcast, because this is what I've actually managed to do. I can't quite believe Helena Bonham Carter is playing Florence Nightingale, but she's having an amazing time and it sounds great. And Andy and I keep having conversations as to how can you talk about charts on the radio. It's not very easy, but I've tried to do it with with the help of one of the finest actors in the world. So anyway, enough.
That's the secret, is it? I need to be a great actor, right?
If you could get an A-lister for us, Andy, I'm sure we could get you on more or less, for sure.
I'll see what I can do. Thanks, Tim. First of all, you may not be a professional chart looker-atter, but you look at charts as does everybody in the world. Therefore, you have more than valid opinions. No reason to be intimidated by this fine crew in front of me. Okay. Who wants to come in first? There's so much. Amanda, I know you're going to have loads to say here. So, Amanda, what's your take?
I have a lot of admiration for the early use of data visualization as an advocacy in public health. Anyone who's joined us before knows that those are where my roots are, is in public health and global health, and thinking about the role that this can play in advocacy. One thing that has always flummoxed me a bit, and Tim, maybe you know the answer to this from your research, is the order of these two charts on this pane, because they read from kind of right to left instead of left to right. And I've always been curious about why, because I find it counterintuitive that I almost have to read the title with the dates on it as well as the 1-2 versus reading it as a before and after that I'm so naturally used to seeing as a left to right comparison. I'm curious if in any of your research anything was discussed about the kind of organization and layout of these different panes.
No, it's a great question. I mean, they clearly have to go clockwise because clockwise is the way you follow it. But I suppose if you rotated the whole thing 180 degrees, you could still get that horizontal connection, because that's the thing presumably she's wrestling with, the horizontal connection between the graphs, while the graphs have to also to run clockwise. But I imagine there must be a way of doing it. So no, I don't know why she did it like that. It's odd. And maybe it's just one of those things that, I mean, in principle, should be possible to do it like that, reorder. But yeah, it could be that it's just one of those things that they hadn't fully ironed out the kinks. I mean, it is incredible that this graph, it didn't quite come from nowhere. There were drafts available. There are other versions of this sort of visualization, but it did spring almost from nowhere.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Tim. Jeff, Steve, what have you got to add?
I can jump in there. I don't know if you have the slide of my redo from this from our very first chart chat episode. We did this. I did this as a bar chart that Tim referenced. And
I don't. I've got my remakes.
No, okay. Let me.
Sorry, Jeff.
How about I just share then?
Yeah, because I think
that I find that interesting, because the one of the common things I hear is often, let's see if this will share here. It could have been a bar chart, right? That's one that we hear a lot. I do wonder, what is it that draws the attention? I think that this tells a lot of the same story, and maybe in an easier way for comparison, would it have gotten the same attention? We'll never know. Is the unique format of what she presented the reason why it drew attention from the people, the audience that she was trying to get the attention from? The other thing from your podcast, was really the talk of, it was already kind of on the decline before the sanitary improvements, right? And so when you put it in a bar chart form, you kind of see, hey, wait a minute, was it going down? And was it going down a lot, before they even implemented these sanitary improvements? Not that to us, the sanitary improvements are kind of obvious. So I do appreciate the fact that it's, is it maybe not necessarily misleading, but is her graphic focusing all of it on one thing, the sanitary improvements, or the combination of the sanitary improvements? Were there other factors, right? And so that's what strikes me as well in the story.
Absolutely. And just looking at that, the Sanitary Commission showed up in the middle of March, but historians of the period reckon that probably they couldn't reasonably have made much difference before April. So there is an argument that the red bars should be one further over. And then once you color the red bar further over, it becomes even less compelling that it was the Sanitary Commission that made the difference, and more compelling that it was just, well, the ebb and flow of the war changed, or it was winter, or just the soldiers had better food, and there's so many other things going on. So yeah, I think she was a bit naughty, but I'm really glad she was.
And so is Jeff, clearly. So.
Well, and Tim, you may not be a professional chart looker at her, but you're thinking very well like an epidemiologist right now at looking at all the various other confounding factors and reasons why we'd see a change in any kind of disease prevalence or incidence in terms of looking at what actually happens there. And I think that the call out on this is interesting because, Jeff, I actually think your annotations are actually one of the really powerful pieces, that it makes it very clear on like what you're trying to say or tell there in terms of commencement of sanitary improvements. But it is a curious question. And I also, did you change this into rates? Am I remembering correctly or incorrectly if she uses raw numbers versus rates in hers?
Yeah, people are asking about the widths of the bars. This really kind of designs it. It's the way the data is collected for the periods of time and is converted into rates, right? Like per thousand. So that's what that is. Yeah, different soldiers at different times. Yeah, different numbers of soldiers. So this is converted.
There's a comment from Christopher Hayes, which I think we might come back to when we talk about Detris. He says Nightingales is a novel way of displaying the data, so sort of shock and awe, grabbing attention, engagement. I think we might park that one until we talk about Detris, because that is somewhat similar.
Yeah, there is one thing I would love to, I hope it's okay, because I think there's more to say about Nightingale than some of the others anyway, but there's one thing I discovered while I was researching my book, How to Make the World Add Up, is there's this very famous quote that you and I, Andy, and maybe other members of the panel have used before, where William Farr, great British statistician, wrote to Nightingale. They worked very closely together, and Farr wrote to Nightingale, and this quote is very famous. You complained that your report would be dry. The drier, the better. Statistics should be the driest of all reading. And so there's this great story about this fiery young advocate, Nightingale. She's in her 30s, and Farr, who's I think at the time in his 50s, possibly even his 60s, and he's got a great Victorian beard, and he's sort of saying, "Oh no, keep it dry," and Nightingale's saying, "No, it's got to be shock and awe. It's got to be powerful." So what's interesting about that is that it wasn't like that at all. So as I looked into it, I realized many of Nightingale's biographers had got this wrong. And actually, Nightingale wrote that to Farr. So Nightingale said to Farr, statistics should be the driest of all reading. The drier, the better. The reason for the confusion is because the original letter is not signed and is dictated. Or the copy we have is, but we know it was from Nightingale to Farr. So trying to square this spectacular diagram with this person who says keep it as dry as possible, it's very interesting. And I guess it directs attention to the idea that if you're going to engage in statistical pyrotechnics, you've got to make sure the data underlying them are really good. And that, I think, is something that we will come back to in the other graphs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Steve?
Yes. Do you have an image of RJ's upcoming book? Because we're going to be hearing a lot more about this. RJ Andrews is going to be
so excited about this book. RJ and I have been talking. It's going to be amazing, I think.
And the other thing is just a cautionary tale, if I might. The people see the Nightingale wedge or rose. They'll see pundits show the Menard Russia campaign of 1812, 1813, and think, oh, well, some pundit said that the Menard chart may be the greatest statistical graph ever made, and this Nightingale chart changed the world. I guess I should be making stuff like that as well. And my answer is, well, probably not. Both of those chart creators absolutely knew their audience and what would work with their audience and the expectation of the audience at the time. You read Sandra Rengren's book of the Menard system, and Menard was expecting everybody to be looking at his charts with a ruler in hand. I don't see anyone looking at the Nightingale chart going, wow, that's amazing. Let me get my protractor and really study this thing. But she had, apparently an uncanny understanding of her audience. And the four of you know this better than I do, but she created that chart for the vulgar public. And by the vulgar public, she meant Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, the heads of the military, the heads of the hospital system, et cetera. And she knew this would work with that audience and get their attention.
Yeah. Amazing. Fantastic. I'll just, here is the PowerPoint deck with what was my favorite slide with my favorite quote attributed to William Farr, but it's assigned to the dustbin. This is the last time you will ever see it live.
No, Andy, you don't need to bin it. All you need to do is add the words Florence Nightingale to William Farr.
Let's do it right now. Yeah, there you go.
Oh. And if we want to get technical, it was probably penned by Dr. Sutherland.
Yes, almost certainly penned by John Sutherland. Yes.
Right. We are all.
This is why writing the book of dashboards took so long.
So, if there's one takeaway for you all from that, it's these historical charts are amazing. There is so much depth. There is so much depth in these things, and they were doing it with paper and pencils and rulers and intuiting what it has now taken us 100 years to kind of work out through academic research about why data visualization works and the powers of storytelling. So keep your eye out for RJ's books. He's got a few coming out, translating and reprinting several eminent pieces of work from the history of data visualization. I also see Robert Cassara is on is one of the participants in the audience today. He's doing an amazing video series, really digging and diving into some of the famous visualizations, one of which is Charles Minard, which you can see on my wall and in my cup. It is amazing, but this study, it just gives so much more the more you dig into it. So if that is fun, we can go on about that all day. But we need to move on to a second chart. Thank you, Tim, for that one. The next one we're going to do, I'm going to cut to my browser, is not quite dexterous. We're going to look at a piece from the New Yorker from
2013, I think.
2013, talking about inequality and New York's subway. So, everyone take a moment. Tim, let's change and tell us about this one and what there is to love and maybe not love as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, what there is to love is obvious. It's beautiful. It's so clever. This is by Larry Buchanan, and it's just so evocative of the New York subway system itself. You can click on, as Andy is doing, and feel free to do so. You can click on any of the subway lines, and then you see the median income in the census tract in which the subway station in question is located. And you just get this very clear sense. This is what's so powerful about the diagram. You get this clear sense of just sitting on the line. You could imagine yourself on the train going from, Beach Street to Broad Channel. And just some of the median incomes are very low. And then you cross over into Manhattan, and then suddenly, wow, look at that. Chambers Street, $205,000 median income. I don't need to remind you that means half the people are making even more than that. And there's something very visceral, there's something very powerful of this as an expression of the inequality in New York. So that's what I love about it. And it got published in the New Yorker. I have tried to be published in the New Yorker. I have not yet succeeded. So it's not to be sniffed at. So what's wrong with this? So forgive me, I'm actually going to read very briefly from my book, How to Make the World Add Up, because I think I put it quite well there. I said, becomes clear when we read the brief article accompanying the infographic, which is full of facts that cannot easily be discovered from the graphic itself. The highest median household income of a subway-endowed census tract in New York City was $205,192. There you see it. The lowest was $12,288. The article also tells us the subway lines with the largest and the smallest income ranges and the largest gap between any two stations. Although quite why any of this information is useful is unclear. The blog post notes that income inequality in Manhattan is similar to inequality in Lesotho or Namibia. Is that bad? It sounds bad. If you happened to carry around a list of the income inequality recorded in every country on the planet, you'd realize it was bad. But do you? The goal of the graphic is not to convey information, but to stir feelings. If the article compared income inequality in New York with other global cities such as London and Tokyo, and other US cities such as Chicago and Los Angeles, we might actually learn something worth knowing. The result is gorgeous, but far less informative than a map would have been. That's my take on that diagram. Looks beautiful, surprisingly difficult to extract information. And I would argue it's not designed to convey information. It's designed to convey emotion. What do you think?
Oh, great one. It's designed to convey not information, but emotion. Before I go to the others, I'd say that's largely okay. I think there's an example in your book, Iraq's Bloody Toll, which is designed to create an emotional response in the chart. I think with certain charts, you can convey emotion and also meaningful information as well.
Florence Nightingale, for example, managed to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I find, as I examine this, it took me ages. I didn't even see the map for the first probably 60 to 120 seconds of looking at this. I was eventually thinking, well, where are these? And then I was like, oh, look, there's a map up here which tells me. But I can never get
if you were a New Yorker, I guess that would spring out more.
That is probably true. So as a non-New Yorker, it's hard for me to get a sense of where this line sits geographically within the city. That's my first take on this. I see, before I go to the others, I see Candice says, the media often goes for emotion over education. Candice, that's a very profound and astute observation. And yeah, whether that's right or wrong is a really good debate. So that's my take. Steve?
I want to vet the data a little bit. There are some things, I traveled a lot of these lines. I grew up in the Bronx. I lived on the Upper East Side for a while, and there's a bunch of stuff going, really, this, not quite buying this. So I have an underlying concern about that. Some people might say the stops the spacing between each spot along the x-axis is identical, but in some cases, boy, that's a really long train ride, and in some cases, it's just 4 city blocks. That's not being related. That doesn't bother me so much. I think this is one of those, I live in New York, and I'm going to look at the train line that I'm on, because you have made a data visualization that is kind of about me or I can relate to. And I'll go, hey, does this look right? Yeah, I kind of get that. Oh, wow. It's not my impression when I stop at that station that the median income is that high. And I think that's kind of the appeal to it. Someone not living in New York, I don't think you're going to learn very much about it, except that, I guess there are some neighborhoods that are very rich and some that aren't.
Yeah. Before I go to Amanda and Jeff, we do have some supporters in the chat, so thanks for those. Unfortunately, I can't see. Laurie says, isn't it a good thing that subways connect diverse populations? Which is a good question. Elizabeth lives in New York, so she knows exactly where these are. And Herman likes the fact that the y-axis stays consistent between clicks, because they could have changed the y-axis. So that is at least nice. And Catherine likes the interactive chart as well. All right, before we come back to those, Amanda or Jeff, Amanda, any pushback, any extra comment?
So I think that Steve's right, that I think this probably has more meaning to a New Yorker than it does to a non-New Yorker in terms of placing yourself in the data and creating that emotive response. I did not find that it was terribly emotively compelling to me because I had so many other questions about what other factors kind of influence where these neighborhoods are and what the features of those neighborhoods are. And so it didn't feel very engaging to me, but I think that's in part because I'm a bit divorced from the location. If you put this same exact chart together for DC Metro, for example, and the DC Metro lines, I think I might find it more engaging and useful. But I think that speaks to how we see ourselves in data and information, and then the context that we bring along with that in terms of the context that we wrap graphs and charts in. And that to me speaks to understanding who your audience is and what is the additional framing and thought and information and knowledge that they're going to bring to that information. I'm also curious because their second line at the top of the descriptor is that things are getting worse. And I actually would be really curious to better understand how are things getting worse, which isn't represented at all in the chart itself. It's really just about a snapshot in time.
Yeah, every chart is a compromise, isn't it? It's like you see one insight and then you're like, but I want more. And that's the challenge of every chart designer. Patrick says he used this visualization when he was trying to find an apartment in New York because you can infer property prices a little bit by median income.
And Andy, go to the number one line for a minute, and I'm going to tell you where you can run into problems. And can we see the top of the map for a second? Can you scroll and see that? Yeah, I guess not.
That is the top of my page.
Okay, so look at the last station on the right. Okay, 242nd Street, Van Cortlandt Park. Low, relatively low. You go just a little bit further, just a little. You are in Riverdale. Riverdale is essentially someone took the richest part of Greenwich, Connecticut, and just plunked it into this part of the Bronx. And the median, income is probably $500,000. It's crazy. I don't know if it's that high, but it's probably way higher than any place else. So I don't know if let's go, we'll find lots of cheap places at the 242nd Street by Van Cortlandt Park. Maybe not.
Good point. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
I there's a lot to like, but I just feel like there's such a missed opportunity. I heard the comment, Tim, I appreciate, it's an emotional viz. It's like, why couldn't this be more? It just adds some more stuff to it. If people are really, here we have one person who's already using it to find an apartment, and like there's useful data in here somehow. Like if we could just extract that out in some format and I did shake my head when you pointed out the highlight up there. It's getting worse. Like what in the viz tells me it's getting worse. Like there's nothing I dislike more about. You gave me a headline, but didn't give me any data to back that headline up. It's like, well, what if that's the point? Give me something that shows that. So I think this could have been scrollyteller form, or just built out a little bit more to give more information with the emotional response here.
I wish I could see
the
all the
author
lines
had collaborated.
Oh, hang on, go ahead, Amanda.
I will say on that front, I wish I could see all the lines on the map at once and some kind of shading or some other way of seeing what the ebb and flow was, so I could see it all overlaid in one piece. And I don't remember seeing that in the
when it first launched. They were all there. All the lines were there.
Okay.
Right. Steve, what was your comment?
Oh, just if only, look, who knows what went into this and the time of it. And maybe it would have been, I would have loved to have done everything that you've just mentioned. Or maybe the person didn't get feedback and iterate. We won't know unless we decide to follow up with the author of this thing. Yeah. But it may have been, oh my gosh, I only had 3 hours to put this thing together. I would have loved to have done all the things that you're talking about. So
yeah. I've got a question for Tim based on one of the comments in line here. I mean, a note I wrote is sometimes you look at charts, you have that like, oh, that was nice. I enjoyed engaging with that. But then you come away and it was like eating a Haribo or a jelly baby. It was a sugar fix, but you gained nothing nutritionally. And then Olivia Greenbacker, says a main question asking myself is, when building a data viz, think about the so what. And she thinks the so what in this viz is not clear. So, Tim, I want to know your thoughts, because I think this is a theme you touch upon in your book. Am I right? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, several times. And it is tricky. So we economists, I think, until about 15 years ago, were not paying as much attention to inequality as we should have done. And it's gradually, over the last 15 years, become more and more of a thing that economists talk about and worry about and try and measure. But it turns out it's quite hard to measure inequality in an intuitive way. So a metric that's caught on is the 1%. So what is the income share or the wealth share? It's totally different, of the top 1%. And you can measure that and you can grasp it intuitively, but there's so much information missing from that indicator. It's like a median indicator, but instead of placing it at 50%, you're placing it at 1% or 99%, depending where you're counting from. And in my home country, the UK, we've had increasing income share at the top of the income distribution, but also the bottom of the income distribution has caught up with the middle. So you would say, well, is income inequality increasing or decreasing, or kind of a bit of both? So another way to do it is to use the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient sort of summarizes loads of information about inequality all across the spectrum and then turns it into a single summary statistic. The trouble with the Gini coefficient is if I tell you the Gini coefficient of the UK of post-tax income in the UK is about 0.38, I think. But, I mean, is that bad? Is that good? Really, really hard to know. Really hard to know. I did calculate for comparison the Gini coefficient of height, the Gini coefficient of life expectancy, and the Gini coefficient of the frequency of sexual intercourse among middle-aged people. And it turns out that last one is vastly more unequal than income, but height is vastly less unequal than income. And you can stick, maybe that's helpful comparison. Maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Yeah, brilliant. Right. Gini coefficient. That's we're in the world of economics. That freaks me out.
Yeah. Well, Corrado Gini was an Italian statistician, and I think a bit of a sort of fascist sympathizer, sadly, but he did study inequality.
All right, brilliant. I'll go and find out more about that, and you can find out more about that in the book as well. Right, talking of consuming jelly babies and coming away with maybe less than you expected, foreshadowing my opinions, let's move on to the final of our charts. And you wanted to talk about Detris by, hang on, right. This is going to take a minute. This is from Information is Beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. It's short and sweet. It doesn't take long.
Did you all just hear the little bit of music there?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we're going to be quiet for a minute. Enjoy Detris. I've got lots of time in my life for 8-bit disco music. Really. So, okay. So this is it's quite old now. As you can see, it's over a decade old. Visualization by David McCandless, the author of Information is Beautiful. And it's hard not to love it at first sight. It's so funny. There's that punchline where you zoom out, and then there's this huge kind of thing from the financial crisis comes down. The music, it's great. It's great until it isn't great. And I am sure lots of you will have views about various aspects of this chart, but what particularly interested me was simply the quality of the data underpinning it. Now, I should say, in fairness to David, he has, I think he's improved his game on this kind of thing in the last 10 years. But also, even here on YouTube, which, let's be honest, YouTube is not the most interactive medium, he's got all the details. At the end of the video, he gives or possibly in the show notes, I forget, he gives a link to, I think it's a Google Docs or Google spreadsheet. You can just go and click so he says sources, the New York Times, the Guardian, the BBC. Yeah, not really. You can click, you can see all the sources, every source, every detail, and there you go. You can just click. That's where he got it from. That's where he got the number from. Click on the link, follow it up, see for yourself.
perfect transparency. I think that's hugely admirable. What's less admirable is a lot of this is sadly garbage in, garbage out. So, for example, those first two comparisons, the cost of the Iraq War, what we were told before, and then the cost of the Iraq War, what we were told after, that's a total apples to oranges comparison. So the first number is the estimated cost to the US Defense Department, and the second number includes macroeconomic damage. There's a cost of the value of lost life to Americans, the impact of higher oil prices, the impact of higher debt service payments. In fact, the financial crisis is partly blamed on the Iraq War because it destabilized the world economy, et cetera, et cetera. So the second block is a hugely expansive measure of the cost of this war. And the first block is a very narrow measure. Like, this is what the Department of Defense says it will spend. And to present it as a before and after comparison, it's just not fair. I mean, I think you could make a fair comparison and it would still be shocking. You don't need to make the unfair comparison. And I could go on all the way through this. You've got, say, stocks compared with flows, like a one-off sum versus an annual sum. You've got turnover compared with profits. Turnover and profits, not the same thing. Everything's got a dollar value. So everything in principle makes sense. But actually, when you drill down, I think very few of these numbers are that easy to defend. And certainly, even when they're defensible, they're not necessarily comparable. And it all happens so fast that you've got to be a proper nerd to figure any of this out. I am a proper nerd, and I did figure it out. And I think ultimately it's kind of worrying. But I'm sure others have other things to say about this. I mean, it's lovely, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think we had Marie and Trudy both were like, this is really cool. I'm guessing that probably the first time they've seen it. I guess a lot of people won't have seen this before. And, and that's the impact David McCandless is trying to go for, to get people to think about this information, possibly in ways they might not have done in the past. But once you start picking at the house of cards, as Tim says, does it fall apart? All right, Jeff, do you want to come back?
I had the same fundamental concern on this one. The one you have right now, like, what does Walmart revenue have to do with the Iraq War debt? The comparisons to me in some of these that I often see are just odd. I think if it were, if we were looking at just spending and looking at the ways that we spend, and it's all, from the same budget and the same apples to apples, it would make much more sense. But I had the same sort of reaction as, why do I care about Walmart revenue in this story, or some of the other ones?
Yeah, so I'll be the devil's advocate, and I'm going to defend this, right? And I think Catherine also in the comments again is defending the chart, right? Clearly, 405 billion compared to 6,000 or 6 trillion for the damage of Iraq. Yeah, they are apples and oranges, perhaps. But if somebody hasn't stopped to sort of register that, an American will go, well, Walmart's huge. That's the biggest organization I know in the US. I mean, maybe it was 10 years ago. And they think, God, I can't even comprehend how much money Walmart makes in a year. And then you go, but that's nothing compared to the damage of this Iraq war that we've just come out of. So, for the benefit, what he was trying to do was trying to say, here's something you might think is big, but it's tiny compared to this other thing. And yes, still caveats apply to that. But thanks for your point there, Catherine. Amanda?
I struggle with the mixing of various different types of data. I think there's also some timeline issues on this, if I recall, around when the data is from, or kind of what the timeliness of it is. I also was confused about the random inclusion of the African debt. I don't understand how that the African debt to the West at the very end, dropping right in there.
It was at the end.
It's the last one that drops in.
I think
As somebody who worked in global health and development for a long time, I look at this as a detritus US type focused graphic, and dropping in African debt to the West just seems like a non sequitur at the end. I was trying to figure out if there were colors to this. Is there a color? Are there meanings to the color on different kinds of things like revenue and debt, or are they somewhat arbitrary?
My impression is that they're fairly arbitrary. I think some of the randomness is deliberate. Some of the randomness is random, and some of the randomness is apparent because of we're viewing from 11 years later. I think, for example, debt forgiveness, third world debt forgiveness was probably a pretty hot topic in 2010. That's just my guess of what's going on. But it is helpful to have comparisons. I think it's very, very helpful to have comparisons. And often when we're structuring charts, we're naturally drawn to the comparisons within the narrow data set that we're looking at. And it can sometimes be very useful to step back and to make a comparison that's a bit surprising. But the comparison does have to be useful. I mean, I always complain about these, like, if you took the US deficit and turned it into $100 bills, it would stretch to the moon or something. You go, okay, so you get the sense that it's big, but like how many dollar bills to the yard anyway? How many yards to the moon? I mean, you've actually learned less than nothing. You're stupider than you were when I first gave you the analogy. So I think there's something of that in this graph of comparisons that seem kind of cool and striking, and then you realize actually I'm even more confused now than I was before. But I think we can all learn from the imaginativeness of the graphic. I mean, he's done that Nigel Holmes thing of making a graph look like another thing, but he's done it so naturally. It's very clever. And the punchline, like you actually laugh and you can kind of gasp at when it zooms out. I mean, that is great. And I think that's a trick that is worth learning from. That's my impression anyway.
Yeah, that's great. I think
I'm sure you've all seen the XKCD version. I think that's a much better implementation of size comparisons. I can post a link to that, but it's a super high resolution where you go from dollars to thousands to billions, millions, trillions, and the level of detail in this where you can drill down and make those comparisons. This to me speaks a whole lot more to those kind of large comparisons of something small to something big. I thought that's an incredible piece of work.
Yeah, amazing, good one. And somebody posted a link to a New York Times. Tim posted a link to the New York Times. Very similar comparison. So I'd also recommend you check that out.
It's the moment where I get to display my Randall Munroe avatar. Since we're spending.
Oh yeah. Well, is that actually Randall Munroe drawing Tim Harford, or is that?
Yes, that is actually Randall Munroe drawing Tim Harford. That is the ultimate geek status play.
Oh wow, I'm in awe. Right. All right. Okay. Well, that was amazing. Let us just wrap this up because we've only got a few minutes before I believe Tim has to leave, and we have a few things to do in a super lightning round. Who wants to say about? Well, I can say we are continuing to do public and private workshops based around the Big Book of Dashboards. Do check out the bigbookofdashboards.com for that. Round 22 of Chart Chat. You can sign up right now. Bigpick.me, CC22. It's on the 26th of May. We hope to have another special guest. Tim, do you want to get last plug of the book?
Data Detective in North America, How to Make the World Add Up. Paperback is out 6th of May, everywhere else in the world. Please buy lots of copies.
It's really good. It is really good.
It's really good. It is also an excellent audiobook that Tim himself reads. If you are an audiobook listener, it is not one of those data books that you have to be looking at the charts and graphs in, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, nice. Good point. And talking of new books, there's another one. Steve.
Yes, The Big Picture, with a lovely quote from Tim Harford on the back, comes out in the United States May 18th, about a month later in Europe and other parts of the world. And you can go to bigpick.me and you can download a sampler. And if you could all do me the favor of clicking the pre-order on Amazon and experiment a little bit. The more people who go to that page and the more people actually place a pre-order, the lower the price will be. And it's already starting to go down. So thank you all for visiting that. But if you want to check out a little bit and download a free sample, go to bigpick.me. Thank you.
All right. Amazing. And Amanda is looking forward to the audiobook version already. Amanda. Tell us something about DVS.
Excitingly enough, we actually have released all of our main stage talks from the Data Visualization Society's first global conference, Outlier, that was hosted in February. If you're into these kind of great short talks and love talking about all things data visualization, I hope that you'll check them out. There's a great playlist that you can run through if you need a nice way of listening to some interesting chart conversations in between our chart chat sessions.
Yeah, amazing. All righty. Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we're about to start the after party. Tim, I believe, do you have to leave?
No, I've got a few minutes.
Tim's sticking around. So that's amazing. So what happens now, if you want to leave, thank you for joining. Thanks everybody for great contributions. Thank you to your chat. This has been amazing. What a great chart chat.